The rain drummed relentlessly against the windows of the old diner in the small town of Willow Creek, Wisconsin, turning the midday streets into slick gray ribbons. The place was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that amplified every clink of silverware and sigh from the few patrons huddled over their meals. Outside, the cold wind whipped fallen leaves into eddies, but inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and frying grease. A woman pushed through the door, her red dress clinging slightly to her frame from the downpour. She moved with quiet grace, her high heels clicking against the worn tile floor like hesitant echoes. Clara Voss. She would later reveal her name, though not her story, shook off her umbrella and chose a table by the window where she could watch the storm rage on. She ordered a black coffee and the cheapest item on the menu, a bowl of soup that barely qualified as a meal. As she waited, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked glass, her expression distant as if she were searching for something lost in the blur. Ethan Harper, the waiter on duty, wiped his hands on his apron and approached. At 32, he carried the weight of endless 12-hour shifts on his shoulders, his once athletic build now lean from exhaustion rather than exercise. A single father scraping by in a town that offered little more than minimum wage and pitying glances, he served her without flourish, his voice polite but clipped. He noticed her the way her fingers trembled slightly around the menu, the subtle elegance that didn't quite fit in this run-down spot, but he said nothing beyond taking her order. Ethan had learned long ago to keep his head down. Curiosity didn't pay the bills. She ate slowly, barely touching the soup, her gaze never leaving the window. When she finished, she stood, smoothed her dress, and walked out without a word or a backward glance. The door chimed softly behind her, swallowed by the storm. Ethan cleared the table a moment later, stacking the dishes with mechanical efficiency. But as he reached for the empty cup, his hand froze. There, tucked beneath the saucer, was a small note and a thin stack of bills. He unfolded the paper first, his brow furrowing at the neat handwriting. "I don't need a reason. Just need to know you still believe in kindness." Below it, the money-crisp $100 bills counting out to $3,000. His breath caught. $3,000. Enough to cover the overdue rent, the stack of medical bills piling up for his daughter Sophie's asthma treatments, maybe even a real meal that didn't come from a can. He glanced around the empty diner, heart pounding. The woman was gone, vanished into the rain like a ghost. No one else had seen her leave, no one knew. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Ethan's mind raced. He could pocket it, no cameras in this old place, no questions asked, or he could run after her, though the storm would have carried her far by now. But something deeper stirred in him, a quiet resolve forged from years of hardship. He gathered the bills, folded the note carefully into his pocket, and walked straight to the front counter where his co-worker, an older woman named Rita, was counting change. "Rita," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "hold on to this for me. If that woman comes back looking for it, give it to her." Rita's eyes widened as she saw the stack. "Ethan, are you crazy? That's a fortune. She left it for you, probably a tip or something." He shook his head. "Doesn't feel right. Maybe she dropped it by mistake. Or maybe it's a test. Either way, it's not mine until I know for sure." The manager, overhearing from the back, poked his head out. "Kid, you're barely making ends meet. Single dad, long hours, why not keep it? No one's gonna know." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "I would know. And that's enough." He turned back to his tables, the weight of the decision settling like the rain outside. But as he wiped down the next surface, questions lingered in the air thick as the storm clouds. Would she return? Would he change his mind? Or was this act of quiet integrity about to unravel something far bigger than a stack of bills, something that could shatter the walls he'd built around his broken life? What Ethan did next would leave the entire diner and perhaps his whole world standing still. 2 days passed in a blur of routine for Ethan. He didn't touch the money he'd handed over to Rita, who kept it locked in the diner's safe, her skeptical glances following him every shift. Ethan pushed through his hours serving truckers and locals with the same quiet efficiency, his mind drifting to the note in his pocket. "Just need to know you still believe in kindness." He hadn't told anyone about it, not his co-workers, not even Sophie. What was there to say? A stranger's generosity didn't change the grind of his life. That life was a careful balance of survival. Ethan had been 24 when his world shattered. His wife Emily had been diagnosed with cancer during her pregnancy with Sophie. She'd fought long enough to hold their daughter once before passing, leaving him a grieving widower and a terrified new father. He'd dropped out of engineering school in his sophomore year, trading textbooks for time cards at whatever job paid the bills. Now at 32, he lived in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a faded building where the heat flickered and the neighbors kept to themselves. Rent was always a stretch, but the real drain was Sophie's asthma flare-ups that sent them rushing to the ER prescriptions that ate through his paycheck like acid. Every evening after the last bus dropped him off, Ethan trudged up the stairs to their unit. The door creaked open, to the faint glow of a nightlight, and there, on the tiny kitchen counter, was always a note from Sophie. "Daddy, eat this. I'm full already," scrawled in crayon beside a half-eaten sandwich or a bowl of cereal. She'd stay up late with their neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who babysat for free out of pity. Sophie was 8 now, small for her age, with Emily's curly brown hair and a smile that could light up the dimmest room. But her wheezy breaths at night reminded Ethan of everything he'd lost and everything he still had to protect. On the third day, as the rain finally eased into a misty drizzle, the diner door chimed again. Ethan looked up from wiping the counter and felt a jolt. It was her, the woman, in the red dress, though today she wore a simple gray coat, her blonde hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She scanned the room briefly before heading straight to the same window table. Ethan hesitated, then grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and approached. "Black coffee," he asked, pouring, without waiting for confirmation. She nodded, her blue eyes meeting his for the first time. There was something guarded in them, like a wall built from old hurts. "You didn't use the money," she said quietly, not as a question, but a statement. Ethan set the pot down, his hands steady from years of practice. "How do you know?" I asked Rita. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. "Why not? You look like you could use it." He leaned against the booth, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. The diner was slow, just a couple at the far end nursing pie. "If you left it because I was kind or whatever you saw, then keeping it would prove you wrong. Kindness isn't something you buy or sell. I used it to remind myself of that, and to teach my daughter the same." Her spoon paused mid-stir. "You have a daughter. Sophie, she's 8. A small smile tugged at his lips, the kind reserved for thoughts of her. "Smart kid, draws pictures that could hang in a gallery someday." Clara, though she hadn't introduced herself yet, tilted her head, her expression softening just a fraction. But she said nothing more, sipping her coffee in silence until she left, paying only for the drink this time. She returned 2 days later, then 3 after that. Each visit followed the same pattern, the window table, black coffee, quiet observation as Ethan worked. At first, he ignored her, focusing on his tasks, but gradually conversation sparked. "What time do you get a break?" she'd ask casually as he refilled her cup. "Around 3 if we're slow," he'd reply, wiping a spill. One afternoon, as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, she ventured further. "What grade is Sophie in?" "3rd. Loves math, hates spelling," he chuckled softly, stacking plates. "She's got her mom's brains." "Her mom?" Clara's voice was gentle, probing without pushing. Ethan paused, his back to her, as he cleared another table. "Gone. Cancer right after Sophie was born." He turned, meeting her gaze. "What about you? What brings you to a place like this so often?" She hesitated, tracing the rim of her mug. "Escaping, I suppose. My parents died, young car accident, left me responsibilities I wasn't ready for." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. But in that shared silence, a fragile connection formed, like threads weaving through the cracks of their guarded lives. The visits became a rhythm in Ethan's days. She'd ask about his dreams. "What would you do if you weren't here?" He'd shrug. "Engineering, maybe. Started college once, but life got in the way." She'd nod her eyes, thoughtful, and leave without fanfare. Then one evening after a grueling shift, Ethan stepped out into the cooling air, unlocking his battered bicycle from the rack. Tucked into the basket was a plain paper bag. He opened it cautiously, a box of expensive asthma inhalers, the kind his insurance barely covered, a soft teddy bear with a stitched smile and a note in elegant script. Don't be afraid to accept good things. Sometimes it's not charity, it's what you deserve. No signature, but he knew. As he pedaled home through the twilight, the bag secure in his grip, Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. But with it came questions. Who was she really? And why him? As the days blurred into a tentative routine, the connection between Ethan and Clara deepened without fanfare. They weren't dating, not officially at least. No labels, no grand gestures. Just shared moments at the window table after his shifts where the coffee grew cold as they traded fragments of their lives. Ethan spoke of Sophie in careful bursts, her latest drawing of a rainbow house, the way she insisted on baking lopsided birthday cakes from scratch. Clara shared glimpses of her own scars, parents lost in a crash when she was barely out of college, thrusting her into managing a family business she never wanted. Their stories mirrored each other in quiet ways, loss that forced them to rebuild alone walls, erected not from anger, but from necessity. Yet beneath the surface, differences simmered. Clara carried an air of quiet affluence, her coats always crisp, her watch subtly expensive, while Ethan's world was one of frayed edges and calculated scrimping. He never mentioned the lean months, the skipped meals to afford Sophie's inhalers, or the shame that gnawed him when he had to ask the manager for an advance. To him, vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. It might shatter the fragile bridge they were building. It all unraveled on a crisp Friday afternoon. Clara arrived earlier than usual, the diner buzzing with the lunch crowd. Ethan wasn't at her table. Instead, he was in the back phone, pressed to his ear, his face pale. Sophie had collapsed at school during recess, a severe asthma attack. He needed to leave immediately, bundle her into a cab to the hospital. The manager harried, and wiping sweat from his brow, nodded reluctantly. Again, Ethan. You've been dipping out a lot lately, and those advances. Try not to make it a habit. Clara, waiting at the counter for her coffee, overheard every word. Her hand tightened around her purse strap. Advances. Frequent absences. The pieces clicked into place like a lock she hadn't wanted to turn. Ethan had never mentioned money troubles, not once, despite their growing closeness. Why the silence? A seed of doubt sprouted. Was he hiding it because he saw her as a mark, someone to exploit with his quiet charm? She left without her order, the diner's bell jingling mockingly behind her. That evening, and the next, and the one after, Clara didn't return. The window table sat empty, a silent accusation. Ethan noticed immediately a hollow ache settling in his chest. He replayed their conversations, wondering if he'd said something wrong. But pride, or was it fear, kept him from seeking her out. He didn't have her number, didn't know her last name. And deep down, he questioned his place. What was he to her? A waiter in a greasy apron, barely holding his life together. She deserved better than his mess. On the fourth day, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the diner floor, the door chimed. Ethan looked up from bussing a table, his heart skipping. Clara strode in her expression unreadable, a manila envelope clutched in her hand. She didn't sit at the window. Instead, she approached him directly, her voice low and edged with something sharp. "Ethan," she said, holding out the envelope. "You need money. Take this. I don't care what it's for." He stared at it, the air thickening around them. The few patrons glanced over curiously, but Ethan barely noticed. "What is this help?" she replied flatly. "You've been struggling, advances, absences. I overheard. Why didn't you say anything?" His face flushed, a mix of anger and humiliation rising like bile. "You think that's why I've been talking to you? For money?" Clara's eyes flashed with hurt, her voice trembling slightly. "I think you've been silent, because if I knew how much you needed it, I'd assume you were using me. And isn't that exactly what's happening? Hiding the truth so I don't pull away." The words landed like blows. Ethan gripped the envelope, his knuckles white, feeling the crisp bills inside. 3,000 more, perhaps another test or pity disguised as kindness. "I've never asked anyone for anything," he said, his voice low and ragged. "Not because I'm some hero enduring it all, but because I know if someone like me opens up, people think it's an act. a sob story to get handouts, and today you're proving them right. Clara's composure cracked her eyes, welling. I left that money because I needed to believe in someone like you, honest kind without strings. But now, I'm not sure if that person even exists. The diner fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Ethan set the envelope on the table with deliberate calm, though his hands shook. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door, pushing it open into the fading light. The bell chimed once, then silence. He didn't look back, the slam of the door echoing in his ears like a final judgment. That evening, as the diner's lights dimmed to their soft evening glow and the last customers trickled out into the cooling night, Clara pushed through the door once more. Her coat was buttoned tightly against the chill, her steps hesitant but determined. She hadn't planned to return, not after the way Ethan had walked away, the door's slam still echoing in her mind like a rebuke. Yet here she was, drawn back to the corner table where everything had begun unraveling. The place was nearly empty, just Rita wiping down the counter and the cook scraping the grill in the back. Clara slid into her usual seat, her eyes scanning the familiar wooden surface. There beneath the salt shaker was a small folded note, the handwriting careful and childlike, inked in purple crayon. She unfolded it slowly, her fingers tracing the words as if they might dissolve. Miss Clara, I'm Sophie Ethan's daughter. He's sad since you stopped coming. But he says not to blame you because he hasn't been brave enough to tell you everything. He borrows money sometimes because I get sick a lot, but he doesn't tell anyone. He's scared they'll think he's just asking for help. I think if you knew you'd like him even more. Love Sophie, 8 years old, but I think a lot. Clara's throat tightened, the paper blurring as tears welled up. She pressed it to her chest, the simple honesty of a child's words piercing through her walls of doubt. Before she could process it fully, the manager, Mr. Harlan, a grizzled man in his 50s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, approached her table, his expression unusually gentle. Miss, he said quietly, setting down a fresh cup of coffee, unasked. I shouldn't be telling you this, but Ethan's a good kid, always has been. He brought that money straight to me the day you left it. Locked it up himself, said to hold it in case you came back. Wouldn't take a dime even when I told him he could use it for his girl. Clara looked up, wiping her eyes. His girl. Mr. Harlan nodded, leaning against the booth. Sophie. Sweet kid, but that asthma. It's rough on him. He's here every day, double shifts sometimes, just to keep her meds coming. Never complains, never asks for help. Sits right here, after closing some nights, staring at that empty table like he's waiting for someone to prove the world's not all bad. He paused, his voice dropping. He's been different since you started coming around. Lighter somehow. Don't know your story, miss, but whatever happened, don't let it make you miss what's real. Clara sat there long after Mr. Harlan walked away, the note still clutched in her hand. The weight of her assumptions, of seeing only need where there had been quiet strength, pressed down on her. Ethan hadn't hidden his struggles to manipulate her. He'd hidden them because he feared her judgment just as she had feared his pity. The next afternoon she returned not with an envelope this time, but with a small gift box, wrapped in simple brown paper. Ethan was at the counter restocking silverware, his movements mechanical, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible load. She approached, slowly setting the box on the counter between them. I bought this the first day, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Meant to give it to Sophie, but I was scared you'd think I was trying to buy my way in. Or that I pitied you. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet etched with tiny stars and a matching hair clip shaped like a crescent moon. Simple, thoughtful. Perfect for a little girl who loved the night sky. Why did you come back? He asked, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. Clara met his eyes, holding them without flinching. Because a little girl wrote me a note that reminded me what real courage looks like. It's not about having all the answers or never needing help. It's about trusting someone enough to let them see you anyway. Ethan's hands tightened around the box, his jaw working as he fought the emotions rising in his throat. I didn't tell you because I thought if you knew how bad it was, the borrowing the ER runs the nights. I lie awake wondering if I'll lose her too. You'd see me the way everyone else does. Just another guy scraping by looking for a handout. Clara stepped closer, reaching across the counter to take his hand in hers. Her touch was warm, steady. I don't need you to be rich, Ethan. I just need you to not walk away again. Not from me. Not from this. The words hung between them, fragile and true. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, then up at her, the walls he'd built cracking in the quiet of the empty diner. Slowly he came around the counter, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home after too long in the cold. Clara melted against him, her arms wrapping around his waist as the last of her defenses fell away. Around them, the diner remained silent, but in that moment, everything shifted. The misunderstanding, the doubt, the fear, they dissolved like mist in the warmth of acceptance. Mr. Harlan watched from the kitchen doorway, a small smile tugging at his lips before he turned away to give them privacy. For the first time, neither felt quite so alone. A week slipped by, in the quiet rhythm of healing, the diner's familiar hum providing a backdrop to Ethan's days. The rain had finally cleared, leaving Willow Creek bathed in the crisp light of early autumn. Each morning, as he unlocked the door for the opening shift, Ethan noticed a small wildflower, daisies one day, clover the next, placed carefully on the windowsill of Clara's table. He knew. Without asking, Sophie, sneaking in with Mrs. Jenkins before school, her small hands arranging the blooms with solemn care. "Why do you do that, kiddo?" he asked her one evening, as they walked home, the setting sun painting the sidewalks in gold. Sophie skipped ahead, her backpack bouncing. "Because you told me, Daddy. If you leave space for kind people, they'll come back when it's time." She beamed up at him, her eyes sparkling with the unshakable faith only a child could hold. Ethan ruffled her hair, a warmth spreading through him. For the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel quite so empty when they stepped inside. The walls, once echoing with silence, now held the faint echo of possibility. That afternoon, as the lunch rush faded and the diner settled into its midday lull, the bell chimed. Clara entered carrying a plain cardboard box tied with string. No elegant coat this time, just jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She spotted Ethan behind the counter and smiled, a genuine curve that reached her eyes. Sophie, who had convinced Mrs. Jenkins to let her stop by after school for homework help, peeked out from the booth where she was coloring. "Clara?" Sophie waved enthusiastically, her crayons scattering. Clara set the box on the table and knelt to Sophie's level. "Hey, sweetheart, I brought something for us to share." She untied the string, revealing a homemade cake chocolate with uneven frosting sprinkled with colorful bits that looked like they'd been added with a child's enthusiasm. "It's not perfect," Clara admitted, glancing at Ethan as he approached. "First time baking in years, but I figured someone who's spent his life being good deserves a proper treat shared with people who won't walk away." Ethan slid into the booth beside Sophie, his hand brushing Clara's as he cut the first slice. The cake was dense, a bit lopsided, but the sweetness filled the air, mingling with the diner's coffee scent. Sophie dug in with glee, chocolate smearing her chin while Ethan savored his bite, slowly his eyes on Clara. "I'm not richer than before," he said quietly, setting down his fork. "Not smarter or stronger than anyone else. But now, I don't feel like I have to prove anything to someone who's already seen the best in me even before I believed it myself." Clara reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with his. "And I don't need you to be anything but who you are." She turned to the window where Sophie's latest flower, a sprig of lavender, swayed gently in the breeze from the cracked pane. "Kindness doesn't get lost," she murmured almost to herself. "It just waits for the right person to witness it. And if you're that person, don't turn away just because you think it's too small to last." The words lingered, wrapping around them like the afternoon light filtering through the glass. Sophie, sensing the moment, leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, her small hand reaching out to pat Clara's arm. "See, we're like a team now," she declared through a mouthful of cake. Ethan squeezed Clara's hand, a silent promise forming in the space between them. No vows, no declarations, just the quiet certainty of staying. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm shadows across the table, the three of them sat there, the world outside fading into irrelevance. For Ethan, The ache of loss that had defined him for so long softened, making room for this, a family not born of blood, but chosen in the unlikeliest of places. Clara stayed until closing, helping Sophie with her drawings while Ethan finished his tasks. When they finally stepped out into the evening, the first stars emerging overhead, Ethan walked them to the bus stop. Sophie skipped between them, chattering about school, oblivious to the deeper currents. At the stop, Clara turned to him, her eyes soft in the twilight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me kindness is real." He pulled her close, Sophie hugging their legs. "And thank you for staying long enough to see it." As the bus pulled away, carrying Clara home, Ethan and Sophie walked back to their apartment, the night air crisp and full of promise. For the first time, the path ahead didn't feel so solitary. People who are kind don't need praise. They just need to be heard once without doubt.